The Untold Story of Ross Martin. A Hollywood tragedy, his doctor warned him. His wife begged him to stop. But on July 3rd, 1981, Ross Martin ignored them both, paying the ultimate price. For 40 years, Hollywood stayed silent about what really claimed the life of television's greatest master of disguise. But now, shocking medical records have uncovered the dark truth behind the final moments of the Wild Wild West star. Even his best friend, Robert Conrad, couldn't save him, and the very studio that made millions off his talent didn't even show up at his funeral. Born as Martin Rosenblatt on March 22, 1920, in Grodek, Poland, Ross Martin came from a Polish Jewish family, living in a world of uncertainty after World War I. His father, Isaac Rosenblatt, worked as a tinsmith, while his mother, Sarah Lerner, cared for the household. Like so many Jewish families in Eastern Europe, they faced growing instability and anti-Semitism, forcing them to make an impossible decision: leave everything behind in search of a safer life in America. At the time of Martin's birth, Grodek was part of Poland, but shifting borders after World War II placed it within Ukraine. The region's constant state of flux made life unpredictable. Even his name would change over time. The boy born as Martin Rosenblatt would eventually become Ross Martin, a name that would define his legacy in America. His journey across the Atlantic began when he was just an infant. On August 29, 1920, the Rosenblatt family boarded the steamship New Relle in Danzig, enduring nearly 3 weeks at sea before arriving at Ellis Island on September 18th. Immigration officials registered his name as Marcus Rosenblatt, just one of many small bureaucratic changes that often altered immigrants' identities. Like millions before them, the Rosenblatt family passed through the strict medical and legal inspections before stepping onto American soil, eventually settling in the Bronx. Growing up in a vibrant immigrant neighborhood, young Ross Martin became fluent in multiple languages before even learning English. At home, he spoke Polish, Yiddish, and Russian. Later, he picked up French, Spanish, and Italian. This remarkable linguistic ability would later become one of his greatest strengths as an actor, even allowing him to seamlessly integrate Russian into his performances as Artemis Gordon in The Wild Wild West. Despite the challenges of being raised in a working-class immigrant family, Martin excelled academically. He attended the City College of New York, a top institution known for producing many first-generation success stories, and graduated magna cum laude. He then pursued a law degree at George Washington University's National University School of Law, setting himself up for a stable career in law or business. But Ross Martin had other plans. In the 1940s, he teamed up with comedian Bernie West to form the duo Ross and West, performing in vaudeville and nightclubs across upstate New York. Their act combined lightning-fast jokes with physical comedy, captivating audiences. West later described Martin as a comedic genius. But while his partner eventually transitioned into writing and producing for television, later working on sitcoms like All in the Family, Martin had his sights set on bigger things. By 1953, he had made his Broadway debut in Hazel Flag, a satirical musical based on the 1937 film Nothing Sacred. Playing Dr. Eaglehofer, Martin shared the stage with Helen Gallagher and Thomas Mitchell, proving himself to be more than just a comedian. His performance showcased a perfect balance of humor and drama, opening the door to even greater opportunities. Soon, his voice became just as famous as his face. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, he was a frequent presence on radio programs like The Cavalcade of America and Dimension X. His ability to shift between accents and characters with uncanny ease led to The Ross Martin Show, where he played multiple roles so seamlessly that listeners often didn't realize it was all the same man. This versatility made him one of the most sought-after voice actors of the era and paved the way for his move into television and film. Hollywood took notice. In 1955, Martin made his film debut in George Pal's sci-fi epic Conquest of Space, playing Sergeant Andre Fodor in a groundbreaking film about humanity's first journey to Mars. While it wasn't a massive hit, it was a stepping stone. By 1958, he was starring in another sci-fi thriller, The Colossus of New York, and his career was gathering momentum. But his big break came in 1959 with Mr. Lucky, a CBS series created by Blake Edwards. Playing Andamo, a fast-talking gunrunner and sidekick to John Vivian's suave gambler, Martin charmed audiences with his quick wit and charisma. Set aboard a floating casino, the show became a cult classic, and Martin's career was officially on the rise. Yet, despite his success, nothing could prepare him for the role that would define his legacy, Artemis Gordon in The Wild Wild West. A master of disguise, an inventor, and the ultimate secret agent, Martin transformed Artemis into one of television's most beloved characters. His chemistry with Robert Conrad was electric, and his ability to morph into countless personas each week showcased the full extent of his talent. But behind the scenes, Hollywood can be a cruel place. And when tragedy struck, Ross Martin would learn just how cold the industry could be. Ross Martin, the chameleon of Hollywood, mixing adventure and danger with high-stakes casino thrills. Mr. Lucky gave Ross Martin a role that played to his strengths. As Andamo, his sharp wit and dry humor made him an instant standout. In the pilot episode, his smuggling operation takes a disastrous turn when authorities uncover a hidden cache of weapons on Lucky's boat. Delivered with deadpan brilliance, his line, "We are in trouble. I am the one responsible for the gun smuggling," set the tone for a character both charming and unpredictable. But Martin didn't just perform. He elevated the role. Off-screen, he improvised dialogue, created his own disguises, and even designed his own makeup. In one episode, he transformed himself into a bartender to spy on mobsters, a skill set he would later refine into an art form. Mr. Lucky earned praise for its stylish storytelling and humor, but despite critical acclaim, the show struggled in the ratings and was canceled after just one season. Still, the industry took notice. TV Guide called Martin's performance effortlessly charming and highlighted his ability to slip between accents and personas with ease. More importantly, the series introduced him to director Blake Edwards, a man who would change his career forever. A villain for the ages. 3 years later, Martin stunned audiences in Experiment in Terror, 1962, delivering a bone-chilling performance as Garland Red Lynch, an asthmatic sociopath terrorizing bank teller Kelly Sherwood, played by Lee Remick. It was a complete departure from his charismatic Andamo. To perfect Lynch's eerie, labored breathing, Martin studied a childhood friend with asthma. He even insisted on performing his own stunts, including a brutal garage attack scene filmed in a single take. The result? Pure terror. One of the most haunting moments in the film occurs when Lynch forces Sherwood to listen over the phone as he strangles her co-worker. His breathing grows heavier, more ragged, with each passing second. Critics drew comparisons to Anthony Perkins' iconic turn as Norman Bates in Psycho. The New York Times called Lynch a masterclass in understated menace. Even director David Lynch, no relation, later admitted that the character inspired Twin Peaks killer Bob. The role earned Martin a Golden Globe nomination for Best Supporting Actor, an extraordinary feat for a villain in a thriller. Initially, he almost turned it down, afraid of being typecast as a movie psychopath. But the risk paid off, cementing his reputation as an actor who could disappear into any role. Comedy, chaos, and 4,000 pies. Then, in 1965, Martin flipped the script yet again. In The Great Race, he proved that a villain could be just as hilarious as he was terrifying. Playing Baron Rolf von Stuppe, a scheming aristocrat attempting a coup in the fictional kingdom of Carpania, Martin was in his element. The film, directed by Blake Edwards, starred Hollywood heavyweights Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis, but every time Martin appeared, he stole the spotlight. One of the film's most memorable scenes is a duel between von Stuppe and Curtis's hero, Leslie. With a smirk, the Baron taunts, "I prefer a man's weapon. How are you with a saber?" Before launching into a brilliantly choreographed sword fight. Martin's comedic timing was impeccable. During the now legendary 10-minute pie fight, a scene requiring over 4,000 cream pies, he improvised some of his best moments. Later he quipped, "I've never been so deliciously humiliated." Critics and audiences adored him. Variety called his performance deliciously suave and noted that he stole every scene without breaking a sweat. With a $12 million budget, the highest ever for a comedy at the time, the film was a major production, and Martin proved he could hold his own alongside Hollywood's biggest stars. Master of Disguise, The Wild Wild West Years. Between 1959 and 1965, Martin showcased his incredible range. As Andamo, he was a lovable trickster. As Garland Lynch, he was pure nightmare fuel. As Baron von Stupa, he was a master of slapstick villainy. His ability to shift between comedy and horror was almost unheard of, and he credited his multilingual upbringing and legal training for his analytical approach to acting. He didn't just play characters, he created them. Director Blake Edwards once said, "Ross could make you laugh, then terrify you, sometimes in the same scene. That was his magic. He could be anyone, at any time." But his most iconic role was just around the corner. In 1965, Ross Martin redefined what it meant to be a sidekick. As Artemis Gordon in The Wild Wild West, he wasn't just James West's backup. He was a genius inventor, a master spy, and television's greatest disguise artist. Martin didn't just wear disguises, he became them. He designed over 90% of his own disguises, transforming himself in his dressing room with wigs, prosthetics, and meticulously crafted costumes. The crew never knew what to expect. In Night of the Vicious Valentine, 1967, he played a hunched-over gravedigger with rotting teeth and a latex hump, so convincing that some crew members mistook him for an actual background actor. But it wasn't just the makeup. Martin had a rare ability to change his entire presence, his voice, posture, mannerisms, until even his co-star Robert Conrad wouldn't recognize him until the cameras rolled. Fluent in 8 languages, he brought authenticity to every role. Whether he was playing a Russian nobleman, a British officer, or a Chinese diplomat, he never settled for caricature. He fully embodied the character. His transformations were so legendary that TV Guide once wrote, "Ross Martin doesn't just wear a mask, he disappears behind it." Over 4 seasons, The Wild Wild West became a cult phenomenon, and Martin's Artemis Gordon was at the heart of its success. But behind the scenes, the show's physically demanding stunts and an industry that often underappreciated character actors took their toll. And in 1969, fate would deal him a devastating blow. Ross Martin, the actor who could be anyone. Ross Martin was a master of transformation, a chameleon who could shift between languages, personalities, and even physical appearances with unsettling ease. Fluent in Polish, Yiddish, Russian, French, Spanish, Italian, German, and English, he could switch accents effortlessly. In Night of the Raven, 1966, he became a flamboyant French magician, complete with a waxed mustache and an exaggerated Parisian lilt. The show's makeup artist Ken Chase later admitted that Martin was more skilled at transformations than most Hollywood effects teams. Martin often sketched disguise ideas on napkins during lunch and then brought them to life himself. But his dedication went beyond accents and costumes. It pushed him to his physical limits. In Night of the Returning Dead, 1968, he played a disfigured arsonist and spent 12 grueling hours in full-body burn makeup. The latex caused severe skin irritation, but he refused to stop filming. His relentless commitment reminded many of silent film legend Lon Chaney Sr., the original Man of a Thousand Faces. One of his most unexpected talents surfaced in Night of the Casual Killer, 1967. In a tense undercover scene, he played Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major on the violin. But this wasn't just a scripted trick. Martin was a classically trained violinist who had studied at Juilliard in the 1940s. The scene was filmed in a single take, with Martin playing live on set. When the cameras stopped rolling, the crew gave him a standing ovation. Even the hardened grips had tears in their eyes. His musical talent even became part of Artemis Gordon's spycraft. In Night of the Fugitives, 1966, he hid a Morse code transmitter inside a harmonica, tapping out secret messages to James West during a prison break. Off-screen, music was his refuge. After intense stunt sequences, he would play Bach on his violin to calm his nerves. Ironically, it was this very refinement that almost cost him the role slum of Artemis Gordon. During auditions, producers thought he was too polished for a Western. To prove them wrong, he improvised a scene where Gordon used a fiddle to distract a saloon full of outlaws. The stunt won him the part and secured his place in television history. Disaster strikes, the heart attack that changed everything. Then, in 1968, disaster struck. On August 17th, during filming for Night of the Attorney Death, Martin collapsed on set. He had suffered a near-fatal heart attack. Doctors found a 95% blockage in his left coronary artery. He was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Hospital, and production halted while he recovered. Despite the severity of his condition, he refused to let it affect his performance. Just 1 year later, in 1969, he was nominated for an Emmy for Outstanding Lead Actor, a rare achievement for a show often dismissed as campy. But just as Martin was receiving the recognition he had long deserved, the Wild Wild West was abruptly canceled. On March 12, 1969, CBS pulled the plug, despite the show ranking 12th in the Nielsen ratings. The reason? Political pressure. In the wake of the assassinations of a Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy, Congress cracked down on television violence. The Wild Wild West became an easy target, even though CBS continued airing the equally violent detective show, Mannix. The cancellation was a devastating blow, one Martin never fully recovered from. Hollywood turns its back on Ross Martin Ross. Martin was at the peak of his career when everything changed. After his heart attack, Hollywood no longer saw him the same way. Studio insurers labeled him high risk, and major networks backed away. In 1970, he was offered the lead in Banyan, a detective series that could have revived his career. But after reviewing his medical records, producers changed their minds. Instead, they cast Robert Forster, a younger actor without health concerns. His agent, Harry Golding, later revealed in a 1975 TV Guide interview that studio executives had been blunt. "We can't gamble on a star who might drop dead mid-season." Even guest roles came with challenges. When Martin was cast in Columbo, suitable for framing, 1971 as smug art critic Dale Kingston, producers demanded a $250,000 insurance bond in case his health caused filming delays. The studio refused to cover it, so Martin had paid for it himself. His performance was masterful, earning him an Emmy nomination. But his career and his income had taken a drastic hit. At his peak on the Wild Wild West, he had made $15,000 per episode, around $115,000 in today's money. By 1973, he was earning just high $3,000 per guest appearance. His troubles didn't stop with live-action roles. In 1972, Hanna-Barbera cast him as Dr. Paul Williams in C-Lab 2020. But after just 2 episodes, the studio's insurers intervened and replaced him. Martin later joked, "I'm the only actor fired for having a heartbeat." The fight to keep acting. Despite these setbacks, Ross Martin never stopped working. Between 1970 and 1981, he booked 87 guest roles. He became Hollywood's go-to actor for villains, eccentric geniuses, and mysterious masterminds. He made memorable appearances in Hawaii Five-0, The Man from UNCLE, and Love American Style, proving time and again that he could still own a scene. His ability to transform into any character had been clear from the start. In 1960, he starred in the Twilight Zone episode The Four of Us Are Dying, playing a con artist who could change his face at will. director Huam, John Brom, later admitted that Martin had improvised 4 distinct accents for the role, including a Brooklyn gangster and a Southern gentleman. None of it was in the script. One of his most unforgettablest performances came in Columbo, Suitable for Framing, 1971. He played Dale Kingston, an arrogant art critic who murders his uncle and frames his aunt. To perfect the character, Martin studied real-life art forger Elmire de Horry. He was so convincing that during filming, Peter Falk, playing Columbo, broke character and muttered, "I hate this guy." The episode's climax, where Kingston is caught by fingerprint-covered art books, pulled in a by 27.3 Nielsen rating, making it the highest-rated Columbo episode of Season 1. Love, loss, and resilience. Ross Martin's life off-screen had just as much drama as his performances. He married Muriel Weiss on June 17, 1941, in a small New York ceremony. At the time, he was studying law at George Washington University while performing in comedy clubs at night. Their daughter, Phyllis Rosenblatt, was born in 1943 and later became a well-known artist in New York. But as Martin's career took off, the strain on their marriage grew. By the late 1950s, they had separated, but never divorced. Even after they parted ways, Martin remained devoted to Muriel. In 1962, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. Martin quietly paid for all her treatments. But the disease was relentless. On March 15, 1965, while Martin was filming The Wild Wild West, Muriel passed away at 47. CBS executives, worried about production delays, refused to give him time off. Ross Martin, the final years and the legacy he left behind. Off for the funeral, Martin ignored CBS's insistence that he stay on set. He flew to New York overnight, said his final goodbye to Muriel, and returned to filming the next morning, without a moment of sleep. Years later, he admitted, "I never forgave myself for not being there when she needed me most." The guilt stayed with him, and he later donated $250,000 to cancer research in her honor. For years, few in Hollywood knew about Muriel's passing. It wasn't until 1967, when Martin remarried, that the truth became public. Phyllis, then 24, struggled with her father's decision to move on. "He loved us," she later said, "but Hollywood became his true family." On September 10, 1967, Martin married Olavi Lucille Parsons in a private Beverly Hills ceremony. A former model and documentary filmmaker, Olavi had 2 children from a previous marriage, Rebecca, born 1955, and George, born 1957. Martin legally adopted them, even changing their birth certificates to list him as their father. Some found this decision unusual, but for Martin, it was a way to make their bond official. Rebecca later said, "He didn't just give us his name, he gave us his heart." A family tested by hardship. Their marriage faced a major challenge almost immediately. In August 1968, during the 4th season of The Wild Wild West, Martin suffered a near-fatal heart attack. Olavi became his full-time caregiver, ensuring he took his medication, smuggling oxygen tanks onto set, and even negotiating with CBS to reduce his workload. She agreed to a 30% pay cut just to keep him employed. The stress of it all took a heavy toll. In 1969, Olavi suffered a miscarriage, a loss Martin never spoke about publicly. Through all of this, they remained strong as a family. Martin's adopted son, George, followed him into acting, landing a role in the 1978 TV movie The New Maverick under his father's guidance. Meanwhile, Olavi's influence led Martin to try his hand at directing. Between 1971 and 1973, he directed 2 episodes of Love, American Style. They supported each other through every challenge, staying together until the very end. The role that almost never was. Ross Martin almost walked away from the role that made him famous. CBS first offered him the part of Artemis Gordon in The Wild Wild West in 1963, but he turned it down 4 times. He had just finished The Great Race and didn't want the grind of weekly television. More than that, he feared being typecast. Martin had trained at Juilliard, spoke 8 languages, and saw TV as a creative trap. He wanted roles that challenged him, not just something that paid the bills. CBS refused to give up. They wanted him so badly that they made an offer no actor could ignore: $5,000 per episode, twice what Robert Conrad was making, creative control over his disguises. The pilot was put on hold for 6 months while they tried to change his mind. When he finally agreed, he had one last demand: Artemis Gordon would never throw a punch. "He's a con man, not a brawler," Martin insisted. That forced the writers to get creative. Instead of fistfights, Artemis relied on deception, disguises, and gadgets, like the sleeping gas cigar in Night of the Inferno, 1965. It was a risk, but it worked. The Wild Wild West premiered on September 17, 1965, and within weeks, Martin was getting 3 times as much fan mail as Conrad. Even years later, he couldn't believe how close he had come to throwing it all away. "I nearly sabotaged my own career," he admitted in 1978. "Thank God Blake Edwards called me a fool and changed my mind." The film that nearly destroyed his career. Martin's best work should have been in movies, but one role nearly killed that dream. In 1962, Blake Edwards cast him as the asthmatic killer Red Lynch in Experiment in Terror. It was a terrifying performance, but Columbia Pictures kept his name out of the trailers and posters. They were afraid audiences wouldn't accept the Mr. Lucky star as a murderer. It was supposed to build suspense, but it backfired. Critics raved about Lynch's eerie presence, but audiences were confused. Martin's voice was heard in 70% of the film, yet his name was nowhere to be found. Worse, when he auditioned for other dramatic roles, casting directors dismissed him as a comedy actor. It even cost him a part in The Manchurian Candidate, which went to Lawrence Harvey. The film later became a cult classic, but the damage had been done. By 1965, Martin's film offers had dried up, and the actor who once avoided television had no choice but to return to it. The final battle, Ross Martin's last days. For all his talent, Martin's greatest fight wasn't in Hollywood. It was with his own heart. On July 3, 1981, he collapsed on a tennis court at the San Vicente Tennis Ranch in Ramona, California. It was a cruel ending. He had taken up the sport to prove his strength after surviving a near-fatal heart attack in 1968. He had undergone quadruple bypass surgery in 1975 and followed a strict regimen of exercise and medication. None of it was enough. Eyewitnesses said he felt dizzy in the middle of a game, staggered toward the clubhouse, then collapsed just a few feet from the entrance. Paramedics arrived in 8 minutes, but his heart had flatlined. Firefighter Art Bale later recalled, "His wife Ola V was screaming, 'Don't let him die.' They shocked him twice, but it was no use. By the time they reached Pomerado Hospital in Poway, he was gone. The official time of death was 3:17 p.m. The cause, a complete blockage of the left anterior descending artery, often called the Widowmaker. Olavi had been just 20 feet away when he collapsed. In the ambulance, she recited the Lord's Prayer between chest compressions. When they reached the hospital, she refused to leave his side for 6 hours, insisting, "He's just resting." Later, she sued the San Vicente Tennis Ranch for $1.2 million, claiming the emergency response was too slow. The case was settled out of court. The final farewell. Ross Martin's funeral was held on July 7, 1981, at Mount Sinai Memorial Park in Los Angeles. More than 300 mourners attended. But there were no speeches, no grand eulogies, just a rabbi reciting Kaddish. Robert Conrad was there, shaken. CBS, the network that once paid him more than its lead star, sent no representatives. Hollywood barely reacted. Only Variety and The Hollywood Reporter ran proper obituaries. Even his death certificate added insult to injury. It listed his occupation as actor retired, despite him having filmed a Love Boat episode just 3 months earlier. But fans never forgot. Every year on his birthday, they still visit his grave at Mount Sinai, leaving tiny violins as a tribute to his most famous role. As Leonard Maltin summed it up, Ross Martin didn't just die. Hollywood lost a piece of its soul that day.